So I will call the Monday, October 7th, 2024 advisory board meeting to order. And I'll start with attendance. Usually I'm looking at Shannon, so I'll turn around. Elizabeth, you're at the top of my screen
Present.
and I can't hear.
Oh, okay. Hold on a second. Let me just check the audio into this. Okay, Elizabeth, could you say that one more time?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yes, I'm here.
Good. And Mark,
Yes, I'm here.
Scott,
Here.
and Emily.
Here.
All right, and then in the room, Aaron,
Here.
Peter,
Present.
Linda,
Here.
Patrick,
Here.
Dan, here. Great. All right, next order of, next order of business is approving the September 23rd, 2024 minutes. They were authored by Lee. I'm guessing that since Shannon's not here and Andrea's not here, we probably don't have them to approve. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll push those off
Thank
to
you.
the next meeting. Patrick made a suggestion, which I think is worth considering. Should we maybe consider a revolving responsibility so no one is overly unfairly burdened, and we don't have to do it every time? The question will be, will we remember who's who?
I think we would just add it to the half of who's the current, who's next, and then we just rotate it.
Does that work?
Yeah.
Okay, good, thank you. So therefore, for those people that are in the room, who wants, can we do it alphabetically? Does that make any sense? To start? All right.
Megan's really excited about that.
So that would mean, and does the person need to be in the room? Probably not, right? Elizabeth, do you mind, since you are A?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. And you know that what you're really doing is you're just reviewing.
Yep.
Okay, good. All right, thank you all. So the next order of business is the quarterly report to the select board, which it will be tonight. I believe we're on the agenda at 7:40. Thanks to Shannon, one of her parting shots, which was great, because accommodate my schedule. So my question is a couple of things. First is, who should attend? And I know I was planning on attending, and Patrick and I talked about you attending.
I'm happy to.
Great, thank you. Do people feel that anyone else needs to attend, either the chairs of the subcommittee, or have folks had a chance to look at the quarterly report? Yes. Okay. So, and I can't see behind me, does anybody feel strongly that it's not in the room that they want to attend? No. Okay. All right, great. And that's what we will do. The second issue is, which is really more just of a housekeeping thing, that's we have, I think the suggestion was made by maybe Shannon, maybe Andrea, maybe Mark, but that we should convert it into bullets. And so I'm gonna, I think between Patrick and I, and hopefully more you than me, we'll do that. And if there's nothing else that's transpired since, we did receive some comments from the select board asking to recognize that the DCAM first meeting, public outreach meeting, had actually taken place. And then a little more detail on some of the subcommittee's work. And thanks to Megan, we've also made some good progress on the budget. So so I think we're in a pretty good place to tell them what we're up to. And Mark, if you have any comments about that, if you don't, you can just give me a thumbs up. That's good, thank you. All right. Wow, and we're back on track. So, the next order of business is, DCAM coordination meeting highlights. Do you want to talk, or you want me to talk about it, or we want to both talk about that?
Are you talking about the meeting? Okay, I think I wasn't at that one, so
I didn't know, I think Chris Carmen.
I did see some notes, but it might make sense for you to
Okay,
cover it.
all right.
I'm sorry,
So-
I'm so sorry. Can I just say, I just circle back on the quarterly report because I just looked for it and I don't see that I ever got it. I'm sorry I was looking while you guys
No.
were talking.
All right.
Did,
I didn't
did
get
we
it.
all get it? Scott, you didn't get it either?
I may have sent it to the, I'm pretty sure I sent it to the chairs.
I didn't see it, but,
But I may-
But I don't remember.
And it may have been, well, it definitely was in the previous package as originally offered.
oh, it was in the previous package from this
Yeah.
one.
And actually I sent the changes to Andrea. And it was supposed to be included in the most recent package.
It was not.
It was not.
This for the select board meeting? Oh,
Yeah, for the select board meeting, I was just trying to see, I think I see, okay, I see, no,
Yeah,
wasn't,
it's definitely in the select board package for today.
okay,
It was in,
The most recent
a
one.
draft of it was in the meeting on the 19th, I think.
the 19th. Okay, I'll look for it
Okay,
Oh, sorry, packet for the 23rd, September 23rd.
for the 23rd. Okay, great, thank you.
I don't know if that's the most recent draft, but
so the most recent one is the one that went out today in select boards. It was
Yeah,
minor tweaks.
so if you're on the town website and you go to the select board meeting package for today, it starts at page 53.
53, awesome, thank you.
Thank you for raising that. Okay, so, what I can tell you is, as of the last meeting, which was this past Friday. They were still collating and organizing the survey results. They were pretty excited about the number of responses that they got. I think it was a total of 315, of which, the majority of them, 284, are actually Concord residents. And they were planning to, I asked them, what should I be reporting to you all about timing, expecting? My understanding is before the next coordination meeting, but ideally it was gonna be before today. I have not seen anything from them. In addition, we shared the consulting matrix that, Scott authored. And they said that they responded very well to it, thought it was a very helpful document. That in turn, engendered a conversation about who should be leading the visioning and master planning services. Should that be from this group, or the town in some capacity, or should it be through DCAM? And this may be the moment to talk about that a little bit further. I would say that it was clear. Paul laid out 3 or 4 concerns that they had, probably the most significant of which was that his charge, so to speak, incorporates that. I'm trying to find one notes from that.
Sorry, Dan, just to make sure I'm following, you're saying he had some concerns with some of the potential items listed in that of those, I think, 20 items?
Yes, that
Okay.
probably the one I'm responding to now, Emily, is who should be leading the visioning process. Who should be hiring the consultant and sort of leading that process? And so, I think he does.
He's on the.
Okay, good. Well, Paul, then maybe I can turn to him and ask him to say, because he speak for himself.
Yeah. Thanks.
Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think the point that you're referencing is, in our conversation, I think the big piece here is that the legislation laid out in this year's budget that authorizes the ultimate disposal of the property requires that the Commissioner of Capital Asset Management and Maintenance via his staff is the assumed portion of that. The commissioner has to undertake a plan for the reuse of said property. So, we need to, at DCAM, we need to produce a plan for that. That is our goal, is for that to then be in line with the zoning that would be in place, but we recognize that that is something that is held by the town and that we can't actually control. So I think that's where our hope has been, to work as closely together as possible. But at the end of the day, we're mandated by the legislation to file a plan with the legislature. And so we do need to, be beholden to that authorizing legislation.
You, Claire,
Yeah.
can you? Question?
Sure, Scott.
Hey, Paul, can you clarify what that involves? What does that plan involve? Are you talking about going out to a master planning consultant with multiple sub-consultants, or what does that involve?
Right. So the legislation lays out like it absolutely has to include input from the whole list of stakeholders and stakeholder groups, which includes this advisory board that were delineated in there. But in order to do a plan for the reuse of the property, that requires explicitly or implicitly undertaking a planning process. Now, as I think we were discussing 2 weeks ago, we don't anticipate doing a parcel by parcel building by building master plan of the site, where we expect to tell a future developer exactly where they will put what building and what exact road layout. We expect it to be at a conceptual level. And if the zoning gets more specific than that, they will need to conform to zoning that puts expectations in line, whether that's for use, whether that's for bulk, whether that's for design, whether that's for location, etc. But that planning would be at a conceptual level that would give articulation to the general structure of what we would expect to see on site. And we would expect that we would see developers creatively approach what they can make money on, what their interest is in doing a project in Concord, in line with what the town would actually permit based on zoning and other regulations. But we're not, we do expect that would be in line with, the articulated goals that the state has put forth on housing production, on greenhouse gas emission reduction, and on an inclusive process that would both, provide job opportunities for residents of the Commonwealth and others in the process, thinking of it inclusively, but hopefully an inclusive outcome of that design as well. But and then we expect that plan would also articulate the way that both state and local priorities will be achieved on the site.
Thank you. Question: what's the type of firm or firms? What's the makeup of a firm that you would engage with for something like this?
Yeah, I would anticipate that it would likely be some type of master planning firm. We're just not asking them. We're not a developer. We're not asking them to get to the master site plan, but it would be that type of a firm.
And what is your, so where are you in the timeline of doing that? What is sort of the timeline to roll that out?
So we have we have a scope of work largely developed for that. We got, I think we have been holding off on this, trying to figure out who is doing what, who is holding engagement in particular. I think I saw that there's been an update to engagement planning from your side. We certainly want to not duplicate any engagement that the advisory board is doing. We want to have a resident-led engagement process as much as possible. We expect that a firm that we would hire would need to have time for community engagement, whether that's leading meetings or whether that's just being the subject matter expert at a meeting being led by an engagement team that the town has hired. That might involve charrettes. We think that there would be some facilitation there, but we're not, we don't want to run a parallel engagement process that duplicates what you all are doing. We want to be additive and supplemental to that.
Elizabeth,
So to me, this is the most worrying conversation we've had so far, because I understand the state wants to work with us, but what's really happening, if you look at what's happening, is you're going to put together the plan and you're going to listen to community input. Very different from that we're going to come forth with something that we're interested in. I understand what you're saying about zoning, but personally, this was exactly what I was worried about in terms of losing control of this site. And I think it's really not to our benefit to just go along with, oh, okay, you guys will listen to us and put together a plan. We should be out of the gate with something we're interested in first before getting behind something that the state proposes. That's my point of view.
Megan,
Thank you. I think this is such a critical conversation, and I know it kind of started a few weeks ago. And it's really important, I think, for me right now, as we're starting to come up with a budget. It's like, who's doing what, and how are we gonna decide how to spend some of these funds? The clock is ticking, and it's time to kind of progress. So I appreciate this conversation. I guess I just wanted, the way and I said I would bring a whiteboard and I did not. The way I kind of laid it out in my notebook last time was thinking about 3 components. And so my understanding is that the legislation really specified DCAM's role in the disposition of this property. And it outlined who they needed to talk to, who the stakeholders are, like Paul just said. And then, so they're kind of doing what they need to do as outlined in the legislation. And there is a lot of room for partnership. And so we are working with DCAM to understand what the town wants to do versus their effort. So, and the three ways I'm thinking about this, the 3 parts are the outreach part for one. The second is the scenario building, which is what I think we're using a few different terms for: planning, visioning, using a master planning firm. I see that as one bucket of scenario building, and then the zoning creation. So when we're going to talk about the budget a little bit later, what I have presented, what I will present and show on the screen, because it's pretty hot off the press, so you're not missing anything, is a plan to pay for outreach and zoning, but not the visioning. And so I think I just wanted to present, that's how I understood we were proceeding, but I want to hear from you all, and I think it's probably important to determine what components this board feels like we should be working on as it's time to kind of start scoping out contracts for these efforts.
thank you. Peter?
Yeah, so when we looked at that great spreadsheet that Scott put together, the one thing I really didn't see was the scenario generation and fiscal impact analysis. Maybe it's covered under 16 economic impact analysis, but if it's not,
It's under 16.
you think that scenario generation and economic impact analysis covers both of those issues?
we could add to it, I just dropped it in there thinking that would. Doesn't,
Okay.
that's not the necessary order, but it's in there.
Okay, thank you, Scott. So,
Yeah.
you know, I just wanted to make sure we had budget assigned for that task. And,
Yes,
yeah, it's sometimes the scenario generation is a task unto itself, and the impact analysis is also. We've got one of the two. I'd just like to have 2 for 2.
And that carried over to, Megan, that concern carried over to the, that worksheet you put together, the matrix spreadsheet. You know, but to your point, I think that, and we had a conversation about this in the land use, last land use committee meeting. We do, as a committee, need to get clear about what our role is going to be. And, you know, I went back and reread the charge from the select board, and Mark's here and can speak to this, but I couldn't find anything in the charge that specifically talked about us reading that. And so that doesn't mean to me that we shouldn't, or that we should not potentially consider asking the select board to expand it or revise it. But I think we need to get some clarity on that, and I think what I had asked the subcommittee to do in the interim was to, just like Paul had done, which I thought was very helpful. To say what it is that we're concerned about, so that we don't reach this impasse as 2 organizations, but instead try to find a place with which we can meet.
Yeah, it feels to me like there's this, you know, Megan, if I were to use your framework on this 3-part framework of outreach, scenario building, and zoning creation, if we're saying that right now the advisory board's remit is numbers 1 and 3, but and DCAM's is 2 exclusively, that's a question that we need to get clarity on. Or if the expectation is that the town has its independent perspective on scenario building / master plan. In which case, you know, for good reasons, it could be viewed as inefficient or important that the town and DCAM have independent perspectives on the master plan.
Well, I mean, I think if this community wasn't interested in participating, DCAM would probably move forward with more comprehensive scope of work, right? But that's not the case. There's a lot of, you know, talented people here that want to participate and have a voice in this critical property. So the layout of having DCAM focus on the scenario building, but to be informed by outreach that is done and managed by this town, by the advisory board. So it's more, you know, approachable conversations with peers in this community, and it's authentic. And that is how we're capturing the information that feeds into the scenario building and the visioning, which is overseen in partnership with DCAM, which will then result in, okay, what does this actually look like in Concord, which kind of filters back out to the zoning. And how do we take the vision that was informed by the public outreach and draft zoning that people are comfortable with for, you know, for density and for, you know, the whole plan, how does that work literally? And so the thought was to have, you know, our consultant do that work because it is like local zoning. So that's how I was thinking about it.
Can I try to respond to that? My concern with, I don't have an argument with anything you just said. My concern is that most people, certainly outside this room and on Zoom, don't have the ability to visualize things.
Okay.
So when we talk about doing community outreach, the only way you're gonna, in my opinion, we're gonna have any meaningful conversations about that is to give people visual tools to understand it. What, you know, what is, for example, what does 15 units per acre really look like? And what does it look like in other settings? That's what, so it's hard for me to imagine a scenario in which we would do it in the linear fashion that you're talking about. And so that's where I'm getting. stuck, a little bit of concern, and this is open for everyone. I think at the end of the day, I think maybe it makes sense for the land use committee to think this through and hear the other concerns that members have made, and then come back and make a recommendation, and then we as a full board will, and we want to hear from you too, Megan, but that's what I'm struggling with.
Yeah, I think I might weigh in here. It seems to me that this process of getting to the actual use of the land is very iterative. If we sort of start from the very end point, we'd say the zoning is the most specific and restrictive. The RFP that eventually gets issued by DCAM, soliciting development, is the next version of that that's hopefully informed by what the zoning is going to look like. But then there's got to be at least a couple of passes, it seems to me, that occur before that. And those are the most important ones from the community perspective, because they kind of set the direction for what's happening at the end. And so, without maybe having exactly the right technical words for this, what I'm saying is I do think we need to create some scenarios that the community can react to, because to Dan's point, people are much better at critiquing than they are at creating out of whole cloth. And then let that feedback happen. And I would like to think that the DCAM process doesn't get too far down the road before input from a much more specific set of community input is acquired. And I would like to think that this board is in the lead on creating that input, so I think if I could have anything I wanted, I'd have the community input first, feeding into the planning the DCAM needs to do, that then on a feedback loop comes back to the community and then gets finalized in their RFP and ultimately the zoning. That's sort of my hope for the process.
That makes a lot of sense, Mark. I mean, maybe, I don't know if we'll solve it in the session today, but I think certainly for something for the land use subcommittee to consider would be the notion of an option with whereby the advisory board has its own kind of consultant, if you will, on Megan's number 2, which is this overall scenario planning. And an alternative path, which is what I think is being proposed, which is DCAM owning the scenario planning. And if it were to be that path, then what is the governance of that look like? Right? Is it that the advisory board is then just informed of is it informed as a consultant? Or is it a kind of, even though DCAM is paying the bills, that consultant's bills, does it actually have kind of like co-lead in terms of shaping that, knowing that the consultant will ultimately answer and report to who's paying their bills, right? And so I think that will be, if you're going to go down that path, I think that there would need to be some specificity as to what that relationship with the consultant or consultants look like.
I'm sort of leaning at this point toward consultants, because some of this information has to be Concord specific, especially in terms of the economic impact analysis. For example, what is the sales price for a single family home that is the break-even point for having town services and school services covered by your residential tax bill? It would be helpful to know that number. There's, and so we can say that houses above this pay for themselves and commercial properties pay for themselves above, if they're valued above this amount, and that type of approach. And then we need to make sure that we cover the affordable components of our project. But, you know, that type of Concord specific number, I don't think we can leave to DCAM to generate. That's something we need to work, you know, generate with town and, you know, through our own analysis on that. Or consult that we have. Go ahead.
I was just gonna ask Peter, are you, would you be, I heard the point, and I think it's an important one you just made. Would you be comfortable, do you feel comfortable that this is something that the land use committee could in fact take on to try to consider the pluses and minuses of the visioning and what the concerns are? So that we could come back 2 weeks from today and make a recommendation that the board create and then react to?
I certainly think we can add it to our agenda.
Right, and I can't, unless someone else has another idea on how to get to a decision, because I am sensitive to Megan's point about the importance of getting to a decision.
What is the, sorry to mention. What are you looking for a recommendation because I think there's just the legislation outlines that DCAM has a significant role in the disposition here and coming up with a plan.
Yeah.
So I just, I don't know what the recommendation would be, like how to participate most fully in the process. Like I just.
How to participate most effectively to ensure that what the feedback we're getting at the community engagement level is in fact heard and incorporated. And we feel confident that the community understands, so we understand that the community understands what it is that they're going to, what that might be created on the land.
So your question for the subcommittee is to make a recommendation about how to, are we talking like ownership of contracts, or are we talking like how specific?
I think for me, it's a continuum thing.
Okay.
You know, one way that this plays out, which, you know, it's hard to imagine how it could easily be reconciled, given your points about the legislation. But could be that, yes, Concord is in fact the contracting party. The other end of the spectrum would be no, it would be DCAM. In either of those cases, it seems to me what we need to articulate as a board and subcommittee is what are the things that we're concerned, what are the deliverables, what are the outcomes that we're looking for? So that, because then, you know, we don't want to be at an impasse. We don't want to be having this conversation for several meetings. We want to figure out, all right, how we're gonna move forward and feel confident that we've got our bases covered.
I might
Okay.
frame it a little bit in another way too, which is that DCAM is required by the legislation to consult with the board that Concord sets up to, which we've basically created the advisory board in order to do that. I think if the advisory board can be clear about what it can deliver in terms of, you know, specific, let's call it prioritized visions, you know, or even some scenarios that outline what the community wants as a result of a process that the advisory board runs that involves community engagement, and we can be specific about when that's going to be available, then it's possible to dovetail those schedules together in such a way that DCAM can know when to expect it, will deliver it at that time, and then it will be the official input from the community and that should, I think, be consistent with what the legislation was trying to get at.
You had a question? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to imagine how this might play out, like, if we as a committee say, no, we really want to have our own visioning planning consultant, I don't think that's going to stop DCAM from also doing that, so we would have to have, then we have kind of these two parallel visions, which could lead to the same conclusions, but it does seem a bit duplicative to have, those simultaneous things. So, and it also seems like then the DCAM consultant would be underinformed by our process, because we would be more in tandem with our consultant.
To
So,
that point, though, I think that could be organized by schedule. Like if the contracting schedule for doing that work is coordinated in the first place, it shouldn't be conflicting.
I think one of the points, sorry, go ahead, Elizabeth.
Sorry, maybe I heard something different, but what I heard Paul say is that they're not engaging a consultant to do a master visioning or concept, that it's really going to be left to the developer to put into place that kind of visioning. Am I wrong about that, Paul?
It's not going to be, we're not, it's maybe it's a point of overly sharp distinction that's being made there. Like, we are planning to do, what might be colloquially called a master planning process, but I want to stop short of calling it a master plan, because I don't expect that we're going to say there's going to be a building here and there's going to be a building here and it's going to be 6 stories tall, and like, we're not going to put forth a master plan, because like a developer is ultimately going to know what types of buildings they do, what they can finance, what they can bring at the point in the cycle when we get there. So we're not pretending that we're going to be able to put forth the master plan of what the developer will do, but we're planning to go through a process that looks very similar to what would eventually lead to that. But I want to call it like stopping short at like a concept plan where we have general ideas. We've thought about different places where buildings could go on the site. We've thought about different configurations of open space. We've thought about different access points and relationship to the Junction Village parcel and how it all plays together. And we'll think about various levels of density, various levels of interface with Route 2, like all the different components to it. It's a planning process. It's just not leading to something that we're going to be bringing to the zoning board to say, or to the zoning approvals to say like, this is what's going to get built. We're putting forth a concept in collaboration with the town, like taking input from residents, taking input, if you guys make a either parallel or similar or separate, report of any type, we have to take that under consideration. We want to take as much information as we can from the local perspective, combined with the state's clear priorities on decarbonization, accessibility, and housing.
So that makes sense. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, and so getting to a point where we're not saying like this is what's going to get built here, but it gives us something that when a developer is solicited, it's not like, here's a blank site in Concord, have fun. It's, there's been a lot of community engagement. There's been a lot of consideration. We've done planning on this. We've done thinking. We expect you to bring your professional expertise as a developer who knows how to get things built in Massachusetts. We expect you to respond to this, but we have done some thinking, and like the community has had input. Like if you go off into left field, like A, that's probably not going to comport to zoning, and B, that's not what is going to be competitive, because we understand what people are looking for here.
Could I ask a follow-up? So
Sure.
I guess my concern is that I understand the state's priorities, and I'm sure they align a lot with our priorities. Is there going to be any room for some creative thinking that's outside just housing and retail? If we say, let's look at some industrial use here, let's look at a hotel. I mean, all these things, is that going to be something that?
Totally.
Okay.
Absolutely. We've heard loud and clear from the first meeting that I had with the town back in March with the town manager at your office. Like, we've heard interest in tax base. Like we have no concern with finding a way to bring commercial development in and boosting local tax base. That's great. Like we are open to a range of priorities on the site, and we expect a hired consultant will examine those, will look at the market for industrial, will look at the market for office, we'll look at the market for retail, we'll look at the market for housing, and bring an informed, both like quantitatively informed and community informed perspective to what is viable on site and what should be considered. And there may be a range of things. Zoning, zoning will ultimately govern, and zoning will probably say, these uses are allowed, these uses are not allowed. We're expecting a form or design in such format. But then the plan allows us to indicate to a prospective developer, like what is expected and what are the areas that they might consider.
Okay, Emily, you had your hand up?
Yeah, so I think as I'm hearing this, I think, it's apparent, right, as a board, we sort of need to run a parallel process that we can present. And maybe Dan, this was sort of the ask you were charging the committee with, but so how can we do that most efficiently and most cost effectively? No one's going to be surprised to hear me say, right, like, as we think about the tap from ULI, this is exactly the medium that can help us bring all of our thoughts together in a cost efficient manner. There are, it brings a multidisciplinary approach. There can be environmentalists, multifamily developers, office, residential, anything you want that are part of this panel. There's a charrette that's involved in that. There's stakeholder input that's involved in that, right? And to me, as we need to, I feel like we do a lot of throwing out ideas, a lot of talking, but we're not really taking much action right now. How can we bring together our, perspective from the committee to present to DCAM efficiently and comprehensively? And so, my agenda really is to sort of push the engagement of this TAP panel, because I think that's going to help us come together as a group and put together a concise picture.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had a question for Paul. So our community engagement, all this information we're gathering from the community is going to be filtered to you and the master planning visioning consultant. My only concern is that we don't have sort of you're in Boston, the master planning firm will probably be in Boston, we're out in Concord. Are we going to have a seat at the table at these meetings? Is there going to be a representative or representatives from our committee that are part of that master planning weekly meetings to make sure that our information from the community and our information, our ideas are being, from all our stakeholders, are being communicated to the master planning consultant that you retain? How does that work?
It's a good question. I'll try to be brief. I know Rep. Cataldo is on the call here, and I want to make sure that we're not running through his time. A few things here. I mean, we are meeting on a bi-weekly basis with several folks on this call from staff and select board. We'll continue to doing that, and we expect that any consultant that we hire will also be meeting regularly with that group. I don't know yet whether we're going to have weekly meetings with a consultant bi-weekly. Like, I don't know exactly how it's going to work, and I'm not, able to say that there won't be meetings that we have with a hired consultant that we have that is just DCAM and the consultant. Like, I can't say that, but I can say very clearly that the consultant will frequently be talking with representatives from the town and from the advisory board, and that they will be hearing from Megan, from Mark, from Dan, from you all on the town's perspective and what should be reflected in the planning process. Absolutely throughout. In the public events, we expect that if you're doing public hearings, if you're doing public engagement, yes, we hope that information will come to us so that our consultants can process that. But we also don't, we're not trying to take it away from you. That should also be information that is directly with you and that informs a consultant that you hire to do zoning. Like, it's not like it has to go from your engagement to us and then boomerang it back around to your zoning consultant, like via us. Like, that's not a middle role that we need to play. Like, we expect that'll go directly there, and hopefully the two are very closely in conversation with one another, but we can't tell you what to do on zoning. And we expect you to be able to, we expect that you'll take the things that you're hearing from the community and implement them as well.
So maybe in the spirit of moving us forward, we're having a really great discussion. One question, Paul, would it be appropriate and can you share the draft SOW with this board?
Yeah, I've shared an earlier version with Megan, and I think that may have gotten circulated to some others previously. I'm happy to share an updated version of what that looks like as well.
Thank you. And then maybe for our land use subcommittee, I think, again, if I could just reiterate that, I think very important for us to have a perspective the next time we come together.
I just wanted to say how important the language is. So what I've heard Paul clarify is that PCAN was doing a conceptual plan. And we're all collecting community input, and there's going to be scenario generation around that conceptual plan, and that'll be the basis of town zoning. And then once the town zoning is in place, PCAN is going to do the request for proposals. A developer will then be selected. The developer will do a master site plan, and then it comes back to the town planning board to permit the project. And so I think if we say conceptual plan rather than master plan, I think that clarifies some of the issues. But it also underscores the most important component here, which is community input. And I would love to hear from our community subcommittee, engagement committee, about what their plans are, because a lot of what the land use committee is queued up to do is based on having that community input. And I really think we need that community input before we can avail ourselves of Emily's gracious offer to deploy ULI, because they need to have something substantive from the community in order to really put their experts to work better on our behalf.
So this may be embedded in what you just said, but just to your point about language matters, I don't want to take anything, I don't want to assume anything, that to really take advantage of the visioning process and even the ULI process, I think we need to define our goals. And I've been saying that, you're probably sounding people tired of hearing me say that, but I think that's going to be really essential, because otherwise, I think a lot of the frustration that I hear, comments that I hear, I think kind of stem from that lack of clarity about what it is that we're trying to do. So I would encourage us to consider that. So, did I miss any other hands? No.
Just note, Lee joined us at 12:30 for the minutes.
Okay. Thank you for joining us, Lee. So if it's possible, and Emily, I think we may have a chance to come back to the ULI. It is certainly on my mind. It's one of the items that I've listed that's coming back.
Sounds good.
And I appreciate you keeping that front and center for us. I have as the next item, an update from you, Megan. Do you want to carve out some more time?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So I have here, draft budget. Don't everyone look at my screen real quick. Hold on. Okay, hold on, let me share this. Do you mind passing this down? Oh, you know what? I don't know if I can share it on here. Because I'm not the host, because I didn't set it up. I'll send it out right now to whoever I can.
Megan, I think I can share it if you want to send it to me.
Oh, thanks, Donna.
Okay.
You're the host. I didn't realize that. Okay.
And I forgot I'd been pulled in to do that. So
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm sending it to you right now. Thanks everyone for bearing with us. Shannon is in Europe. She just ran the Berlin Marathon. So she is out of here, kind of trying to backfill her role here. So thanks everybody. That's why I was a little late with the online too. Okay, Donna's gonna pull this up to share the screen. Thank you. I think at our last conversation, there's talk about like, okay, what are the plans for the funds that we should be expecting this month, that we're so grateful to have to work on the planning of this parcel. And I want to start this conversation by sharing that there's still some we haven't received the funds yet. So we don't have the details of the agreement for the funds. We do have reason to believe that they have to be spent at the end of FY25, which is what we've heard from Representative Cataldo and Kyle. We are hoping to use them over 2 fiscal years. And so I haven't seen kind of firm confirmation that they have to be yet from the grant agreement. And I'm hoping to present a draft budget over 2 fiscal years, because that is really what we need to be a real steward of these funds to get the best output. So we're hopeful that there may be some path potentially to extend the use of these funds beyond June 30th. So I outlined here several categories for expenses. The number one is public outreach. We've talked a lot about that today. We'd be looking to appropriate about $50,000 per fiscal year. As we talked about, this is a critical effort to inform the concept planning, which I thought would be led by DCAM, and the zoning effort that would be managed by the town. But if things shift up there, then we can make some changes. For the wastewater treatment plant, I have we don't have real expenses expected for the next couple months. We have used some funds from our enterprise fund to analyze the plant, and we expect that we might need additional funds in the next fiscal year to continue to explore that. For the rotary analysis, we are currently working with Stantec to provide technical support with MassDOT for improvements identified in the Route 2 corridor study. So we had 50,000 that were granted through ARPA for this effort, and we are gonna need a little bit more for the specific rotary area around MCI Concord. So we are planning to use about $35,000 this fiscal year for that effort. Consultants and legal services, this is a little bit of a placeholder. It's hard to know how much this would cost, but there likely will be legal costs associated with this. There's going to be negotiations about the wastewater treatment plan at a minimum, where we're going to be using town council, and there may be other technical legal services, or beyond legal, but technical consulting services that might be required. I have traffic impact here because it's really critical that we're looking at the impact of the future use of this parcel, but I don't have funds assigned to it at this point, since we're earlier on in the process with looking at what do we want to see here. I feel like it might come at a later time, and there will need to be further study, but kind of who pays for that? Is that something that we should be doing at this moment? I wanted to identify it, but maybe think that it wouldn't be in the next year and a half. Next year I have interim beautification and documentation. And my notes here, to summarize, there were some really astute questions and requests at the first public hearing regarding removal of the barbed wire. Could there be some type of mural on the wall? And I know that, in thinking about it a little bit more, we don't want to create additional problems with security, with the barbed wire. And there's been some instances of temporary art becoming kind of a beloved fixture in communities across, across the world. And then what do we do if we need to keep, a big chunk of the wall up there? But the spirit of what I heard is, how can we kind of mark the next phase of this site? And how can we do some type of temporary improvements while we're in this transition period? And so we have a lot of ideas from murals that are temporary in nature, with materials that disintegrate over, a period of time, to focusing more on photos of the existing site and maybe kind of oral histories and programming around the site over the next couple of years. So I think you could do some light projections on the wall. Like, there's a lot of different things that I think in this community, this community has such a care so much for the arts and our cultural districts, thinking about this transitional moment and telling a story in that period, I think deserves some funding assigned. So this is, again, this is a draft. We talked about zoning consultant. This is 30,000 this year, 70,000 next year. We're not going to be writing zoning this year. We're still in this information gathering phase, but we have our town planner on the call too. And I think it would be helpful to have a consultant on board to be part of and hear the planning and visioning and outreach process, so that when it comes time to codify it, the vision into zoning, they have a reference point and have been hearing about what the community is interested in, and maybe some of the sticking points along the way. And I also plugged in, I know a decision has been made here, but again, this is a draft for the Urban Land Institute Technical Assistance Panel. From my perspective, I thought it was a really helpful presentation at the most recent meeting. I think I have been part of this before, and I think the application process alone of organizing the materials required is a worthwhile effort. And I know that the timeline would be a few months out, but I wonder if it, as mentioned today, I think it's definitely a valuable exercise and something that, you might want to consider. So this brings us to 475 over 2 years. And I was hoping to hear from, the subcommittees about specific financial components that have been discussed. This, as I mentioned last time, I want to work together to put together a proposed budget to the town manager for her consideration. And my interest today was to have something on paper to react to. So I don't, hopefully you don't take it as trying to, totally control this process. I'm just trying to have something to discuss. So that's it for me.
I think it was great.
Yeah, I think great.
Sure.
Peter?
Yeah, so some of the things the land use committee sort of talked about was scenario, having funds for scenario generation, fiscal impact analysis, and the point that Dan brought up about community visualization, being able to show people what some of the scenarios end up looking like. So that some people learn visually, some people learn in different manners, so the more touches we can get to them with that. And then
Sorry, Peter, that's different from the scenario building process that we were discussing earlier? Or is that?
yeah, we're gonna need
Okay,
some,
it is different, you're
yeah,
saying?
it is. The state will come up with their conceptual plan, and then we need to run that through our cost analysis of what is it going to cost the town to support, 10,000 square feet of retail and 80 houses and things like that, or 100,000 square feet of biotech and things like that. There's a lot of water involved in biotech. We have enough capacity for that. So we need to be able to go through that analysis and see what
I see.
cost of town. And then the other thing was would we be able to tap into like the Mass Cultural Council for some of the interim beautification funds?
maybe this does not fall within either cultural district.
Right, just that the state cultural councils often give money to things that benefit the whole community. As opposed to just this.
Yeah, we can definitely explore that.
This might be, thank you, Megan, this is fantastic. Given your opening remarks, I wonder if now is a good time to actually like invite Rep. Cataldo.
Oh, sure.
Kyle and. We thought it might be helpful to maybe either confirm, what you outlined in terms of the budget assumptions, Megan, or if there's any specificity Rep. Cataldo or Kyle could add, as it relates to the funds.
Oh, yeah, we can shut this. Donna, do you want to stop sharing so we can?
Is that my cue?
That's yeah.
Good
So-
afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Chair McCurdy and Chair Gainsborough and members of the committee and Select Board Member Howell for inviting me and Kyle to join you today. And also just want to reiterate my gratitude to all of the members of this committee for all of the work they're putting towards this. I continue to feel like the town's putting its best foot forward in dealing with this really exciting new opportunity in interfacing with the state. I had the opportunity to sit down with Commissioner Bakey and Paul on Friday, and they were just gushing about the work of the people in Concord and how atypical in a great way it is to have so much sophistication and also an earnest desire to be collaborating with the state. So thank you, and really excited to continue to be involved in this process. Let me start with the earmarks. So, and to be clear, everything I'm talking about right now, it's in writing. It's been exactly what it said in writing in the legislation since the last day of July. So there are 2 earmarks in the budget. They have slightly different language, but that's as a result of 1 earmark coming from the House, 1 earmark coming from the Senate. Often earmarks like those for the same purpose are reconciled into 1 number, but in this case, that's not what happened. And it's just very clearly laid out there in the budget. It's 475 to the town of Concord for this process, and then 250,000 for the town of Concord for this process. So there's a different word there, but it's all going to the same place, and that adds up, if my math is correct, to $725,000. Any questions about that? I want to stop there, and I'd love for this to be a discussion because it's great that I get so many questions one-off from members of this committee, but I'd love to have questions about that or from the staff, because I know there had been some confusion from the staff last week as well about what that amount was and why. So we should definitely answer those questions now if those questions continue to exist.
I love it when we round up. It's great.
Me too, Peter. All right, so that's the number. Now let me I'm gonna get to the part about when it needs to be spent, but I want to just zoom out a little bit. That is a very significant earmark. The size of the earmark reflects the role that all of us who worked for the earmark had in mind for this committee, which, as you'll recall, this committee was created in concert with the drafting of the legislation. If this was a consultation and community engagement committee, that would have been a $15,000 earmark. It's very decidedly not that. And this relates to the conversation that I think was just happening. I cannot say enough how much confidence I have in the veracity of the intention by Commissioner Bakey, Paul, and that team to have a very collaborative process. I'm all the way in on that, 11 out of 10. And it is just true that the creative engine behind the decision-making process is where the power lies in this situation. The legislation has given this community both the money and the law to have as much agency as it desires. So I'm hearing a lot of things being posed as questions by members of the committee, which is totally fine as an approach. That could be phrased as declarative sentences. This committee, yes, can hire and control and have answer to it a master planning consultant. It can be the locus, the focal point of idea generation, of concept generation, as Elizabeth and others have just mentioned, if it decides to do that. So there's an affirmative choice there. And as part of that, the money is there to do that. Let me pause there.
Are there any questions on the legislation? Because Megan, I know you referenced legislation several times. I just want like to say, to Dalva's point, just having one conversation. Are there any questions on the legislation and the roles of DCAN versus the advisory board versus the town?
Thank you for the opportunity. No, I think probably my questions lie less with what's possible and more about what you all want to do. I think I appreciate Representative that clarity. I think the questions for me for next step is like how we are working with DCAM to divvy up the work and how the advisory board advising the select board wants to accomplish the work. So thank you.
I appreciate that clarification because I think you're hitting on a really significant issue, which is do we have the capacity as an advisory board to manage that? And I don't know that we have to answer that in this moment, but I think that is something we clearly need to discuss and consider, or will we need, if we were to go down that path, will we need some additional help? And I don't, it's not just me anyways, but it's something we have to sort out.
Hi, Megan, do you mind if I add a few things to your comments?
Sure.
So I just want to say, Representative Cataldo, thank you so much for your work on the legislation and the appropriation, and also for being generally available 24/7. I don't know how you do it. You reply back so quickly to all our inquiries, and thank you for that.
Kyle is the answer.
Thank you to Kyle. So we also are really appreciative of the earmarks. As you know, we've been in touch with the Office of Economic Development, and staff feel maybe that there is not a lot of time to spend this money. And so the 12-month fiscal year has already been shortened into 10 months. And we understand that the Office of Economic Development has sent contracts or their budgets to administration and finance, and they're waiting for the approval. So we've communicated that to your office and to the Office of Economic Development, and we are eager to see those contracts, and we know that you'll work with us to push those through as quickly as possible.
Chair McCurdy, Gainsborough, can I just respond to Chris there?
Please.
Thank you. As I see Elizabeth has her hand up as well. So for those who aren't very familiar, and I'm learning it now for the first time in terms of the earmark and fiscal process, every year it's around mid-October. It's always been around mid-October. it will very likely, based on Kyle and my communication with ANF and with ECD over the last several weeks, we expect it to be around mid-October again. There's been some questions about 9C cuts. We're not seeing the type of fiscal atmosphere that led to 9C cuts last year. So I think everyone can just operate under the assumption until further notice that this year is going to be like any other year. So there's really no surprises leading up to those issues. We know that this is front and center. These contracts and the desire to disperse this money is front and center on ANF and economic development's radar. So I'm not concerned. I'm not nervous about that at all. In regards to the timeline to spend it, I remain unconvinced that there's a problem there. So it's really more of a decision about what role this committee wants to take. So remember that. First of all, what's being requested is an extraordinary remedy. So there would really need to be a problem. And I don't know, even if I request it, whether that's possible. And I would say there's a more likely than not chance that the answer is no. So that's one part of this. These decisions are made on a year-by-year basis for a reason. And so typically what would happen is if the funds were not spent, they would revert back to the state. And then we would be asking for more money next year. Now, I've come into this whole entire process assuming that we are going to be asking for more earmarks next year. But I think that we need to see where we are at the end of the year in terms of what the purpose is for that and how it's been going. And I think part of what will inform that is what role this town and this committee decide to take in this process. So it remains my view, and we can continue to have this conversation and continue to discuss this. And I am going to be paying very close attention to what happens in terms of the role of the land use envisioning committee within this committee, because I think that's probably a major driver of cost. I think if this committee decides that it's going to be a creative engine for what happens in this very important parcel of land, then this committee is very likely not going to have any trouble spending that money by June 30th. There might need to be a little bit of creativity in terms of the cadence of the expenditures with a contract, things like this, but we have very sophisticated and experienced people in those areas. If this committee is going to not take on that responsibility and that type of role, I still assume that there will be a need for more funding next fiscal year, but I don't think it's going to be by saving money that was not used. I think it's going to be a new conversation about what that is going to be. And I'm glad to discuss that on this call. I think now would be, or on this meeting, I think now would be a great time to have that discussion, at least in the first instance.
Elizabeth, I see you've had your hand up for a while.
So thank you, Simon. I think that was incredibly clearly laid out. And I am kind of shocked isn't the right word, but surprised that we're even debating this. If we can have creative agency, why wouldn't we take it? I doubt any of us got on this board to just listen and not give our own opinions and try to form something. They put us on this board because we have expertise. I don't hesitate for a second. And Dan, I think we need to make that decision, or else a lot of us feel, I'm going to speak for some people, that we might be wasting our time on this committee if we are just a listening committee, which is what Simon just said specifically, we are not. So I would encourage us to make a decision of that and actually become the creative agency here.
I just wanted some clarification, and Megan, either you or Simon can do it. So we enter into a contract with folks to provide all of the services, and it's $725,000, and we're only through, $500,000 on June 30th. Is that still considered spent because it's encumbered? That's really my question.
So I think I can try to take a stab at answering that because I know Kyle has talked with our liaisons and the relevant agencies. So the money has to be spent. So, but it is possible, and Peter, you've had tons of experience with this, and I know others have as well. You can make that as a down payment. That might not be necessarily ideal, but it doesn't mean all the work has to be done on June 30th. But the money has to be spent.
Thank you.
You want- Elizabeth, I don't want to leave your point hanging. I am in agreement with you, and I think what I would like to see happen, and I'm just sort of reiterating it, that I'm looking at Peter, that we would come up with, in our next meeting, we'll come up with a recommendation to the full board, or what that would look like, and how we'll do it. So thank you for making that point.
Thank you.
Yes, I'll also mention that, I think it's good for us to dig down on this and come out with a sense of the committee, because I would like to be in a position where, since tonight is the night that we're going to give our first quarterly update, if we have a sense that this is the direction, and I do support it as well, we worked hard to create this advisory board so that this advisory board would get this done for the community. And if you want to express enthusiasm about doing that and take the temperature of the select board, I think you're going to find that the select board is very supportive, but let's ask the question and have that discussion today, and then we all know where we're going.
That's helpful. This is a detail, but in light of that, do you recommend that Patrick and I are there in person, or is it okay on Zoom?
Either one will be, we appreciate it. I know I'm personally going to be on Zoom tonight, but the board is there in person, and it's always great when people can attend in person.
Okay, great, thank you. We are 120, and we're actually kind of remarkably within the realm. We were going to do next the report from subcommittees, but we've kind of done versions of that. Is there anybody here or on Zoom that wants to share something that may not have been discussed yet?
I would only add so John's not able to join today, who chairs our community engagement subcommittee, but we met on Friday. Discuss a number of topics. Maybe most importantly or pertinent for today's discussion is the engagement of a communications professional. And so our work, we have a draft scope of work outlined. We've been working closely with Donna, who is on today, and believe the next step, though John has our kind of committee heads, was to engage with Megan, Chris, and the town to discuss the process to procure support.
And that will, I think, as long as Megan is involved in it, then I can feel confident that the loop will get closed with Paul. So right, you can vote, so they understand what we're. I know.
Yeah, I don't know if we're gonna. I think the question is this a separate effort than a larger effort for the whole thing? We would need to know before we procure one vendor, right? Or is this?
I don't think so. So it could be Megan. I don't think necessarily it needs to be, depending on kind of the how the scope of work for that consultant.
I guess with like the question mark for other services we may procure, it's a little confusing to me about how to look at the whole picture. You know what I mean?
Totally. So right now, we've got like the League of Women Voters coming out.
Yeah.
Community.
Okay.
Climate Action Network. So we've got some near term
Yeah.
things that we need support.
Okay.
Now.
Okay, I got it.
And so rather than waiting to answer the big question, we thought it would be wise to get support and now.
Okay, I'll take a look at that.
In front of the community for events that are coming up in a few weeks.
Are you okay with that, Meg?
Yeah, I haven't looked at it yet. I know you said, I think you just met at the end of last week. So I'll take, yep, I'll take a look at that.
The other thing that I wanted to raise as a question, for the legal and governance group, and I'm glad that for a whole bunch of reasons that Simon and Kyle are on, but, and Paul, we're trying to figure out, if you think about all the work of the three committees, the legal governance is probably the one that lags the most because it really needs the work of the first two to happen. And well, I guess I was wondering to try to take optimize their involvement. Does it make any sense to use them as the conduit through which communications happen with state, feds, and maybe local? Or is that too cumbersome? That's one question for us to ponder. The other one is, I was maybe only in my head, I was always under the impression that the legal governance folks would be the ones that actually ran the filming process and the restrictions. So that once we knew what it was that we were trying to create there, that group would actually take that and turn it into meaningful zoning. And so it was. So I'm not expecting an answer unless people have strong feelings or questions about it, but I'm just trying to, as I said,
Yeah.
So,
I can speak to it a little bit. Yeah, this is what we were going through in our last meeting where we met with Chris and honestly trying to find our way through what the clearest communication lines are. I think we all expressed some frustration, unfortunately, to Mark, who was the only select board member there, that there was things going on that we didn't know about. So if we're trying to talk to, for example, I think the first thing we decided was to talk to DOT because it didn't seem like anyone had really made that connection. I think I was surprised today to hear, or not surprised, but on the budget, seeing that those conversations have already been taking place. That's something that we weren't told. So it doesn't seem like the lines of communication are clear. And that is something that we talked about doing. Lee, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about putting you on the spot, but I know you talked to Paul a little bit about how to make these the clearest lines of communication.
I think we're all still finding our way, but you know, one criticism I have, and it's not directing it at any one person in particular, but as Elizabeth just alluded, there's a lot going on that's not, the information is not trickling down to this full board or I assume the subcommittee. So it's kind of preventing us from gaining any momentum. We're still finding our way, but you know, if the full board wants to pursue on a parallel path, the planning exercise, basically hire our own master planner. You know, I guess the risk of that is that the recommendation ends up being something drastically different than what DCAM's recommendation is going to be. But, you know, maybe that's a necessary exercise, but I'd support doing that with just from the town's perspective.
So I am interested in your both parts, but the first part of your conversation about the communications, because everyone that's on the screen and everyone that's here is all doing work at different paces and different intensities. And information is generated every minute. And the question is, how do we feel confident that we're adequately closing the loop and keeping all the different parts? What I've been trying to do when I sit in the meetings with DCAM coordination meetings, which I really appreciate them inviting and the town inviting me into, is I try to share that information with the chairs. And that happens on a once every 2 week basis, which is not super. It's helpful, but it's not as helpful probably as more time. So I don't have an answer for that. But I'd be very interested on people's recommendations.
I would just say from my point of view, and this was kind of the point of the legal government, I would be happy if we were some sort of conduit for information. But as we tried to figure our way through that, it didn't seem like that was necessarily what everyone wanted. And that there are already kind of lines of communication set up. So if that's something you want to pursue that we do, I think I'm going to just talk for the committee that that's something that we were contemplating being originally. So
I think that there's also an opportunity to continue to build out the services matrix that we were talking about so that we know at different levels, like which staff person, for example, is working on the transportation planning and which group or even which specific member of the advisory board might be the primary liaison on that. And I think once we sort of get those roles and responsibilities a little bit more clearly delineated and in one place where we can see them, it'll be a lot easier. Right now, I think everybody's kind of hitting the same, 4 or 5 points over and over, and we haven't really, disseminated those responsibilities down to individual people where we know where to point to. And once we get those single point of contacts nailed down, I think we'll be a lot better off in general.
I think, Mark, that raises an interesting point though, which is this is a board, the governance of which has like been unwieldy as we don't have a management team.
Yeah.
Right, and I think that this, like what we've been circling around today, has been like effectively, if I use Megan's 3-part framework, who's managing those work streams, like who are the executives, if you will, that are managing those? And I think that it sounds like, we need to come with a more firm proposal so that the board is advising someone who is managing this project. Right, and I think that we just heard from Rep. Cataldo that we have the funds and the remit to put that management team in place, right? And so I think that I would offer that, in the very short near term, we come up with a plan for engaging a management team, if you want to call it that, that we could then advise.
I agree with that.
Okay, we have -1 minute for public comments. But given the patience that everyone has, and thank you again, Katal, I really appreciate you guys doing that and the work you're doing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and we'll remain ready to communicate and to advocate. And I just wanted to add one other thing for the item for the calendar for everybody's kind of frame of reference here in terms of funding. Those of you who were part of this process last spring, I know Mark was right in the weeds of it. Rep. Gentile and I were going in to make our budget requests in April, and then Senator Barrett about a month after that. So we should definitely be we are already keeping in constant communication. It's another reason that we should continue to do that, because I'm going to want to know from what the next phase of needed expenditures are for this purpose as we look at next fiscal year.
And
thanks again for having me.
Sure, in that time frame would be, so I'm clear, you'd need that information from us April or sooner than that?
I'd love to have it as soon as I can, because I try to give the chair of Ways and Means as much heads up as possible. Because this was an extraordinary earmark. We were talking about it from January on, and I received a lot of helpful data from experts, including some of whom are on this committee, to help come up with the numbers that we came up with. And because this was a lot of money this time, we gave a lot of detail about what we thought would need to go into that. And so the more time you have, the more I can socialize and advocate for bigger numbers.
Good, thank you. Is there anyone that's been patient enough on the Zoom call that public that has a public comment that they'd like to make? Raise your hand or turn your screen on. Writing down. I'm not seeing anyone. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. I would accept a motion for adjourning.
I'll move, Peter.
And I think we could just sing, right? Thank you. All right, everybody, thank you.
Thank you.